It's no secret that I've spent my entire life struggling with one chronic illness or another. Many years ago, I wrote a book with one of my dear friends, Deanna Favre, called The Cure for the Chronic Life. And it talked about dealing with the struggles that come from life on both a physical and spiritual level. Maybe you're fighting pain, or someone you know is living in the chronic life. Today, I'm sharing some of our principles of overcoming the hopelessness that holds you back. Hey friends, welcome to You Matter podcast. I'm Shane Stanford, and yes, today I'm a little bit different than I normally dress. It's been a crazy week. My wife had to have surgery on her hand, and I had a hemophilia injury, and so we've just had a crazy time. And so today I'm going a little bit more casual, let's put it that way. This is in honor of my daughter, who is a sophomore, soon to be junior at the University of Arkansas. So go Suey Pigs. I have now two daughters from Tennessee, one that'll be at Arkansas, so we at least kept it in the SEC family, so that's something special. Today we're going to be starting a couple of week series called The Cure for the Chronic Life, and this is a book that I did back in 2010 with Deanna Favre. Deanna, for those of you who don't know or don't play football, is the spouse of Brett Favre, and Brett built a home here in the town that I grew up in, and Deanna and I got to know each other through my sister, who was her daughter's history teacher. I know that you need a chart now to be able to put all this together, but got to be friends. She wrote a foreword for my book, When God Disappears, and we began to talk about things that were going on in our lives. Deanna is a breast cancer survivor, has also dealt with a lot of injuries. But as we began to talk about, with my story, being a person who is hemophilia, HIV positive, Hep C positive, we both know what it's like to get into habits that can be chronical or to live chronically in certain habits that, we're trying to protect our body, or we're trying to protect our schedule, our sleeping patterns, whatever it might be. You do what you have to do in order, even if you have to live in a chronic situation, to not be defined by that chronicness. And that's really where the conversation started. And so we began to think about all of the ways that people had guided us, the examples and the wisdom that God had sent through people that he had angled into both of our paths as she was going through her cancer treatment and overcoming that. And of course, me going through my illnesses. And we began to notice that as much as you can talk about a chronic physical life, there's also reasons to be worried about a chronic spiritual life and a chronic life in general. Now, what chronicness is when you get into a pattern of responding to a health situation that begins to define your daily routine. And so there's a lot of folks who go through crisis and illness in their life, but once that illness heals or the surgery is over, they then begin the process, which is the next stage of getting life back together, getting back to normal, whatever normal may be. In a chronic situation, physically, the body cannot move out of that. The body is continuing to be at some means or another deficient in what it needs to do. And therefore, a lot of people end up with illnesses that aren't going to be cured, but that can be treated. But yet that's going to have a huge impact on who they are and how they live out their life. And that's what I call the chronic life. The chronic life is you get into a series of patterns that are unhealthy for you or have been the result of unhealthy patterns, and therefore you end up having to respond and react to the chronicness of life. And as many chronically physically ill people there are in this world, there are just as many, if not more, people who are dealing with chronic spiritual lives, chronic in their relationships, chronic in their emotional health. And therefore, by the time they get to the end of the day, what they're discovering is that they just don't have any room left for any new friends or for any new adventures, or they just don't have the strength. They're just exhausted to just get by the day and to do what they can. And I've known a lot of people like that in my ministry. I'm thinking of one particular woman who was a leader in one of the first churches that I ever served. And she came with a lot of physical illnesses. She had been through a lot in her life and dealt with several chronic illnesses. But it didn't take long to listen to her to realize that she had an even more deficient chronic spiritual life and a chronic way of seeing the world, because she was always the first to go negative. She was always the first to go and to feel like there was a misbalance, not just an imbalance, but a misbalance, something that almost happened as the result of the choices, not just the way life had impacted her. And I watched over a number of years her make decisions. And by the time it was over, that chronic nature had defined pretty much every aspect of her life, from her marriage to a relationship with her children and grandchildren. And it had also begun to affect her health, which is one of the reasons why we talk a lot about faith and wellness here at JourneyWise, is because I don't know of an emotion that affects our health more than our hope, and that affects our health more than how we see the world and how we are able to take the next step. But also, living in the world spiritually has a major effect on your body. We know that people who go through heart surgery, who have been prayed for and prayed over, tend to do better. That's not just an opinion. That is a scientific fact. And so there's this major connection point between the things that we feel and experience and that we are exhibiting spiritually and what else is happening in our life. And so you can't disconnect the idea of chronic relationship without dealing first with the nature of what does it mean to have a chronic relationship. And I'll give you some examples on this. If you get the book, this is the book right here, Cure for the Chronic Life, what you'll discover is that we spend some time at the start talking about the 7 worries of life in crisis. And a couple of these worries, I won't go into all of them, are number one, filling your life with just a lot of garbage, a lot of emotional, mental, relational, intellectual garbage. And we had a phrase in our house, and that is that garbage in, garbage out. So if you're fueling your life, if you're fueling your relationships with things that aren't healthy, that are not going to bring nutrients to the health of your existence, you're going to end up putting out garbage. You're going to end up, sowing that, because that is what, as you seed and as you reap, that is what the major impact of that looks like. And it's not just in terms of relationships, but you can have a chronic attitude. You can have a chronic deficiency in how you study Scripture. That's one of the ones that I see more than anything else, is over 30 years of ministry, watching people who'll say, well, I'm going to read my Bible this year. And they'll make it about 3 days and maybe have a couple off days. They'll make another 3 or 4 but by the time you get to February or March, they feel so behind that it's just easier to live in the crisis and the chronicness of that crisis than it is to live in being a healthier person. So what I want to talk to you today are really the 4 principles for how do you overcome a chronic life. So I said some of the worries that you have that take place in crisis are they affect your relationships. Crisis will begin to affect your decision-making. Crisis will affect the way that you look at the resources that you have around you. And all of us, some have more resources according to the world, certainly, than others. But every one of us has some resource that has been given to us once we are a child of God. And Paul talks about this as spiritual gifts. And I know that of the 23 spiritual gifts named in Scripture, that I'm good at about 3 of them. The other 20, I am not so hot. The lowest spiritual gift I have is speaking in tongues. I just don't have that gift. I wish I did. But right around there is mercy and administration, 2 things that I am not a big fan of. And I don't have passion for it. Have I had to do both? Absolutely. 30-something years in the ministry, leading large churches and organizations. You have to be able to understand the importance of administration. And so what I've done is I've gone out and put people who have those gifts around me. Same with mercy. Someone came up to me the other day after I'd finished teaching Sunday school, and they said, because I'd made the statement about being so poor at mercy. And I think part of that is because I've had to deal with, I've never had easy issues. And so sometimes I think when people come to me and they don't have It's sort of like the hangnail of life crises. I tend to not be as merciful with them because I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, if you had to deal with this over here or what I know someone else is dealing with, then that would be a very different story. But what happens in the nature of these giftings brought together is that God is working his will in us. That's the whole point of our spiritual walk, is to be made more and more in the likeness of his son Jesus so that we bring glory to the Father. And what a powerful thing that is. What happens in a chronic life is that even in our spiritual walk, we begin to take for granted, or we don't have hope. And when you don't have hope, you don't have vision. Without vision, the people perish. Everything becomes affected from that one central understanding of you're missing something that brings life to you, that you have passion for. And a chronic life is symptomized first by a lack of passion, by a lack of something that gives you life that you have to do. Now, I didn't necessarily get life from those spiritual gifts that I didn't do well, but at the same time, I would always be encouraged, or I was always being, shown what the benefit of working hard in that particular gift that I wasn't naturally born with, that hard work does pay off. But when it came to just the things that I loved to do, my top two spiritual gifts were faith and teaching. Loved the fact that I had been given the gift of faith, which had such a powerful sense in my understanding, but it also made me responsible as a person who has a gift in faith to know the faith. And that's why apologetics has been such an important part of my life, is because I didn't want to just know what I believed. I wanted to be able to talk about why I believed what I believed. And the same is true in terms of teaching. I want to be teaching because it fills me up as much as I can fill someone else up. And that is the whole process of when Jesus kind of tells his disciples, you're always going to be learners and students, but you'll also become teachers. And you'll always be both of those at the same time, still learning, still looking for opportunities to grow, but at the same time being called to be a witness. And that's really how you affect a chronic life or a chronic existence, is you can't just have, 8 things that if you do these differently, then you'll be better. There are some wonderful tools out there to address what it means to live in a chronic life. But the 4 principles that Deanna and I set aside are ones that we saw constantly in our own journey, in our own life. And not only as they were being shared to us or with us, how it affected us that when we turned around and shared those with others. So it wasn't, again, it's this amazing cycle of life that happens whenever we experience these wonderful principles to bring a cure to our chronic existence. God said, not only will you have life and have it eternal, but I want you to have life that is abundant. He's not talking about having wealth and lots of things. What he's talking about is having a sense of the presence of God, to know that wherever you are, that in Jesus you are enough, and that in Jesus you do have hope. In Jesus you can have joy. And those are the things that I think are so important for us when we're dealing with something like the chronic life. And here's the other thing that I want to mention before we get into the actual principles. Chronic illnesses, you still have to get up and go. That's part of the issue, is that there's this fine line between, I'm sick, but I still have responsibilities. I'm sick, but I still have to keep my calendar up to date. I'm sick, but I still have to make a living. And therefore, people who have chronic illnesses actually go through a greater physical stress than those who go through very acute issues of medical health. And therefore, your body kind of prepares itself through the adrenaline and its response to be able to face what's coming next. But over time, whenever you're just getting up to face the next day, it can wear on you, and it can really begin to imprint itself in terms of the image of your life and how God's image shows up in your life, which is so very important. So let's begin with the principles. Now, I did not, and I want to make this clear as we're talking about this, I did not name the book The Cure for the Chronic Life and then try to find 4 principles that match CURE. It actually happened the other direction. Many years, I was listening to all these conversations about when I was diagnosed with having high blood pressure because of my medicines, or I was diagnosed with having diabetes because of my medicine. And I was having all of these chronic diagnoses. And everybody would come back and say, well, you need to do boom, boom, and boom. Okay, do those things and you will be better. Now, will it make you well? Not completely, not until your body is absolutely reborn. You're going to deal with this chronic illness is the way it is 95% of the time. So you're just going to have to face the day. But how do you face that day when you're living in a chronic illness? Well, it's the same way that you have to face the day whenever you have a chronic spiritual life or a chronic life journey. And the first principle is the C. I wanted to make it easy on everybody, C-U-R-E. The C is a chronic life is only overcome through compassion. And what I mean by this comes from the root word of what compassion comes from, which literally, and this is shown in several different languages, there's a Native American form of the word that we get compassion from that I really like most of all. And it is this idea of a person who walks in the literal shoes of a neighbor. That's what compassion is. And I think it's important to differentiate between what is sympathy and what is empathy here. Sympathy is when someone looks at your situation and goes, oh my goodness, excuse me, isn't that terrible? They feel sorry for you, but then they move on to the next scenario or the next circumstance. Empathy is when you see the struggle of a brother and you decide to walk with them in that struggle. The best way for you to overcome the chronic nature of your spiritual life is to walk with someone else in their journey. We learn that specifically from Jesus. Why did he go up and down that Jordan Valley from the northern part there around Sea of Galilee all the way down to Jerusalem? Why did Jesus travel the whole of the area? Well, it was because as he kept moving, he would intersect into the lives of so many amazing people. And Jesus was teaching his disciples in a living proof, hey, you can do this. You can show compassion. You can live empathetically in someone's life. You don't become the doormat. You don't take abuse. What it means to live with empathy is to help understand, which is the next one, the you, what it means for that person to live as they do. Because you really can't make long-lasting changes that are specific to a particular issue or illness or circumstance unless you have first slowed down enough to one, walk with them, to show real compassion, but then two, to seek to understand. Paul says that, you can only be a living and holy sacrifice beginning by first the renewing of your mind. And I think what happens in a lot of cases in our spiritual walk is we have people who feel sorry for someone and they'll try to respond in that circumstance, but then they get frustrated because that person's not responding the way that they would want them to respond or the way they've seen other people respond. I've been guilty of this and wondered, why in the world doesn't this person get it? Even Jesus in Mark 8 asked the question to his disciples, how much longer do I need to put up with you folks? Because you are not getting it. And therefore, is there a way for me to convey this information? I can almost see Jesus trying to explain it. Convey this information so that you'll stop stepping on your own feet and actually be able to address the issue of the child with demon possession or address the issue of the blind man or the man who cannot walk. You can't do this, Jesus says, unless you have prayer. Well, what's prayer, friends? Prayer is the intersection between God's love and God's righteousness. It is the benefit, the overflow of what happens when the God who created the universe reconciles that universe back to him. Because it's not about a religious act. It's not about an obligation. Prayer becomes about communication in a relationship. That's really all it is. We tend to, I think, overdo a lot of the sacredness of it, not because it's not sacred, not because it doesn't matter. But what prayer is, C.S. Lewis said, is not an attempt to change God, but to pray ourselves so that we become changed. And the nature of that is, how do we get into the will of God? Well, the only way you can get into the will of God is to spend some time walking with God. And so it requires first for you to have understanding, to have clarity in your mind, to be able to ask the questions about whatever circumstance may be in your life, but to spend time trying to understand the heart of God. Will you get it totally? No. But God does give us enough information that we are not left aimless, that we do have a lot of of information about who God is. Let's take his character, for instance. The character of God is one that we can be sure of, that we can be confident in, because through the character of God, we see the dilemma that God had in creation. But instead of just starting over and doing the world again and creation again, he decides to reconcile us for the benefit of love and relationship. That's a powerful testament to the character of God. Well, why is it important for us to understand the character of God? Because there are going to be circumstances in our life that are not going to make a lot of sense. And all you can really come to the point of is, I will trust God. And because I trust God, I believe he's working for goodness in my life, which is exactly what he tells Paul. And so these coming together of these first two principles, compassion and understanding, they're two different things, by the way. Compassion is not understanding. Understanding is not compassion. What the difference is compassion moves you to recalibrate your life, the point of reference of your life, so that you want to be able to walk with that brother or sister. You want to be able to walk in that better path, that healthier path. That's what compassion means, literally to step into the shoes of another person. Because the nature of what it means to be a person who experiences compassion, who shares compassion, is that it really, most of the work is not the other person's to engage compassion from you. It begins in your own heart about how you see the world. That's why Jesus said, the second commandment is love the Lord, love your neighbor as yourself. And it's just as important as the first. You can't do number two, in terms of these commandments, unless you've done the first one, which is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You have to be as healthy in your relationship and in seeking of God as you are in working out every day, because that's what's building the health of your spiritual walk. And so when your spiritual walk goes out into the world and you see a person, or you have empathy for a person, you don't have the privilege of just walking by. You're called to respond. And that's what compassion, that's what empathy is this call to walk in the shoes of your brother and sister. But it doesn't stop there. It just starts there. Because then you have the responsibility to understand their circumstances and to understand the issues that they deal with. I used to see this a lot when I was working with this home in Memphis called Hope House. And Hope House was specifically for women who had been in domestic abuse situations and who had a child, and the mother and or the child were both HIV positive. And it was always interesting, as I would say to people, as I would talk to them at the house, they would say, well, we don't, what do you need? And I assumed they all needed money, in terms of the needs of a particular nonprofit. And so this one nonprofit would say to me, nope, we don't need money. We need people to be here and to be in relationship, for people to be able to sit at whatever the city gate is, and to make sure that that Jesus walks by when people come and see that relationship and the power of what that means. Understanding is more than just an intellectual exercise. Understanding is when you're putting the pieces of a particular picture together in the appropriate way and the helpful way. Those are two different things. In the appropriate way and the healthy way to be able to respond to that circumstance. And so therefore, appropriate may be, I would not do a lot of counseling that was male to female. And the reason being is that in times when we are at our most emotionally fragile, what I would try to do is I would try to restrict any other conversation or distraction that could possibly come from either side of the conversation. Well, it took an intake session, which is what most good counselors do. They do an intake session. They learn about your history. They learn about your family of origin. They learn about any chronic conditions that you have, any issues that you're facing relationally. And you begin that process. So really, honestly, friends, counseling doesn't really begin until the second session. And I think most people would agree with that first session is coming to an understanding, realizing that, hey, I need to invest myself in the relationship of this person. So now what do I need to do in order to understand what their circumstances are? Well, that's the first two principles. Next time, we'll talk about the last two as we continue out this conversation about how to address the chronic life. But I want to encourage you to go to our website at journeywise.network. and you'll see information about all of our many resources. But one resource in particular that I think that you're going to enjoy is what we call our Life Along the Way series. It is a 360-day journey with Jesus. And what happens in this journey is we did not want it to be simply an intellectual exercise. And so it has scripture and it has wonderful commentary on what that scripture that you would have read for the day was. But it also has moments for you to be able to listen, to pray, to care about things beyond yourself. We have Bible studies and family table talks in the middle of the journey each week. And the reason we do that is to try to build this sense together that we do not have to live in the chronic, repetitive nature of our brokenness. Jesus has done something more for us in that. And it begins by being able to see our world objectively, to be able to see our world with compassion. And as we're walking in the steps of our brothers and sisters, to truly spend time understanding, recalibrating our spirit for what it means for us to be the witness of Jesus Christ in this circumstance, and to allow them to be the witnesses back to us. What an important thing that is. We'll take up part 2 next week. Be salt and light. You matter. God bless you.